seizure of 3 airliners, the hijacking of 1 airliner almost beggars belief in the United States, given the degree of security which every airport in the United States normally has. For 3 airliners apparently to have been hijacked separately, commandeered, their own people presumably put at the controls and then directly aimed in suicide attacks at these 3 targets is extraordinary. The planning for this must have taken months and months, and the people must have been put in place months and months ago.
You mentioned there the security at American airports. Anybody who travels in the US is constantly aware of that. Of course, the whole security system across the US was upgraded after the Lockerbie attack and the Lockerbie disaster. They apparently took the security at airports very seriously.
Indeed. Immediately after that, as you may recall, anybody travelling to or from the United States was subjected to the most rigorous security checks, and those have remained in place ever since.
We're looking at our first pictures of the emergency services at ground level in New York. As we can see, they will be operating at full power this morning, as a result, of course, of the planes that crashed into the Twin Trade Towers in Manhattan. There's also been a plane crash in Washington, D.C. into the Pentagon, the heart of American security and government and armed forces. The emergency services have worked swiftly. We heard from a witness on the ground, and all hospitals, of course, on standby to take the hundreds of casualties that have resulted. We have no reports yet of fatalities or numbers confirmed, but let me remind you that it was a passenger plane flying from Boston, one of the planes, a 767, an American Airlines, that flew from Boston. Let's show you the pictures of that crash once again. One plane had already crashed into one of the towers. We see the smoke. Then, coming in from the right-hand side of the screen, another plane crashes into the Twin Tower behind the one that we see in the foreground of the picture. The explosion is to our left. One of those planes flew out of Boston this morning, a 767. We hear reports that a 3rd passenger plane was hijacked, and that was the one, we believe, that was flown into the Pentagon. And those are the pictures live from Washington, D.C. We hear now that in the United States, all aircraft takeoffs have been stopped. Presumably, this is part of the huge security operation that will now be underway from the East Coast to the West, from the North to the South of the United States of America. We had a statement from President George W. Bush earlier. He said the full resources of the United States would go to help the victims, and in his own inimitable style, he said, "We will find those folk who committed this act." One can only assume that this will be top of the list of what must be done in the United States today to make sure that no such operation ever happens again. These pictures are coming live from New York and live from Washington, D.C. We're now going to go to our reporter in the ITV newsroom. Helen Wright is there. Helen, what more can you tell us now?
Well, we know that the West Wing of the White House has been evacuated amid terrorist threats and in response to what's happened in other parts of Washington and in New York. The parts of the Pentagon unaffected by this explosion have been evacuated. We can still see plumes of smoke billowing from the top of the Pentagon. As you said, we believe a 3rd hijacked aircraft is involved in this incident at the Pentagon. 2 aircraft, we believe, hijacked earlier, were involved in the incident in New York, both flown into the separate towers of the World Trade Center. New York itself appears to be being sealed off at the moment. Roads and bridges into Manhattan, into the centre of New York, have been closed. There is nobody moving in and out. The emergency services, obviously, they're operating on the streets, dealing with the continuing fires, dealing with casualties. President Bush appeared to be preparing the nation for very large casualty figures from what had happened in New York. And then, of course, we hear about this incident at the Pentagon in Washington. They struck right at the heart of both America's symbolic military centre and right at the heart of its financial centre.
For now, Helen Wright from the ITV newsroom, thank you. We're seeing
why they think they're able to devise some sort of strategy for dealing with them.
Okay.
But Listen, I'm going to leave it there with you. We're getting reports in from the United States, Valerie, which report that the Federal Aviation Authority says that all planes in the United States are being held on the ground, which is quite extraordinary, unprecedented, I'd have thought, in American history for every single plane in the United States to be held on the ground.
Indeed, John. Now, I think we're joined online now by Abdul Bari Atwan, a Middle East expert. We're getting unconfirmed reports that Middle East terrorists are claiming responsibility. What do you make of that?
Well, actually, we heard that Palestinian Democratic Front claimed responsibility for that, but I don't believe this report is accurate simply because it is a very small organization, it is secular one, it is not used to this kind of action. But if it is a Middle Eastern attacks or there is a Middle Eastern involvement behind that, I'm not surprised if radical Islamic groups like Bin Laden groups or other actually were behind that. Where the Trade Center was attacked before by Islamic groups about 4 years ago. So, or 5 years ago exactly. So if it's happening...
Minister for Women.
Dealing with other financial centres around the world.
Obvious signs. I'm going to show you what they are.
Substantial casualties. Although there have been no confirmation of casualties, one figure that has been put out by one of the news agencies here is up to 1,000 casualties so far. Another major factor is the falling debris from the two buildings. Surrounding the World Trade Center, there are many other financial institutions and other buildings, and thousands of workers going to those offices at this particular time in the morning. At the moment, Midtown New York is strangely quiet because all of the emergency services are downtown in the financial sector.
Now, Alan, we're hearing reports that these attacks have been claimed by the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, not, as I understand it, a very well-known group of terrorists, but clearly in New York and also at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., the infrastructure there was as prepared as it ever could have been for terrorist attacks.
Well, the World Trade Center has been a very secure building since the last incidents in the 90s, and in order to get to any of the offices there, you have to go through security on the ground floor, you have to be badged, you have to be announced before you can get into the elevators to visit any building. But the thought of a commercial airliner being hijacked and flown deliberately into a building is almost possible to safeguard against. I actually saw the first plane crash into the first building. It came over my apartment building in Greenwich Village, which is not so far from the World Financial Center, and it sounded as if it was a military jet because it was so low, but it did have a whining sound as if it was losing height, and it was then followed by this very, very loud explosion. And then from the roof of my building I could see the unbelievable, which was this huge pall of smoke coming from about 20 stories below the summit of the building. And then incredibly, as if this were not enough, when the television networks began to run the story, we could see live a second incident where the second plane crashed into the second building. That was seen live here on television. So the city is in crisis. The subways are shut. All public buildings will be shut. I imagine that all high-rise buildings here will be evacuated. We know that 3 planes have been hijacked. They appear to be commercial airliners. I've heard some of your other commentators saying this itself is incredible in the United States, where security is at its maximum at commercial airfields. This is an unfolding story. We don't know what is going to happen, but I think that the whole of New York is on full emergency alert.
Remind our viewers that, as you say, Alan, it is an unfolding story. We can see pictures too from Washington. These are pictures of the Pentagon in the center of Washington. It appears that it too has been the victim of a terrorist attack this morning US time, of course. A passenger jet has flown into it, and as a result the explosion and the smoke is what you're witnessing now. Alan, can you give us an idea of the scene on the streets of New York this morning as you watch?
It's strangely quiet where I am now. I think people are in shock, and a lot of people are glued to their television sets, both in offices and in their homes. Even now I can still hear other emergency services racing downtown. But the World Trade Center is part of our everyday geography in New York. It's hard to think of another London equivalent, perhaps St. Paul's Cathedral or Big Ben.